Guys, you might not know this, but I am an absolute huge movie nerd. So given that we're just a few days out from Halloween, I figured that I would help you guys ring out the Halloween season in the best possible way by giving you a list of the absolute most fucked up movies streaming right now. So I'm ranking these movies on my F list. F is, of course, for fucked up. We're going from 0 to 5, and these are going to be ranked on special features like creative demonstrations of violence. I've long accepted that if horror movies aren't going to give us good plots or solid acting, we can at least expect buckets of blood and really creative visual effects. If it covers disturbing topics, if it's hard to watch, if it's new or interesting, or if it finds creative ways to play into the horror theme, it gets higher marks. So these aren't going to be like your normie slasher movies. The first movie on this list is an honorable mention. Orphan First Kill clocks in at 0.5 Fs. It is a prequel to the 2009 movie, and it features the same actress. The story centers around an adult European girl who passes as a small child, and she preys on unsuspecting families who adopt her. In this movie, it shows her leaving a psych ward and eventually finding her way to the States, where she claims to be the missing, kidnapped daughter of a very wealthy couple. Julia Stiles plays the girl's mother, who is skeptical, and tension builds throughout the movie. We saw this last night. This was a spite selection from my wife. When I take too long to pick a movie, she'll just call out the first thing she sees and makes me watch it, even if it's bad, as punishment. I expected this to be bad. I actually enjoyed this movie a lot. It has a twist that comes, and it doesn't come in the third act. It comes early enough in the movie that it contributes to the tension and the development of the plot. It's very unexpected, and it takes the movie in an interesting direction. It's not just the typical psychopathic killer comes in, starts stabbing people while everybody else just screams and clutches their pearls. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of people to root against in this movie. The violence and the subject matter isn't really that extreme for horror movies. It's pretty run-of-the-mill, and it's actually pretty tame, I would say, as far as violence goes. But it is suspenseful. It does have an interesting plot. I strongly suggest you guys check it out. Now, getting to the heart of the fucked up horror movie list, we're gonna start number 1. The first 2 movies are actually going to be Nicolas Cage vehicles. I love myself some Nick Cage, and especially when he hits his notes of being really eccentric and loud and over the top, I think he's really good in horror movies. Mom and Dad is another one that you might want to check out. Now, the reason I like this movie is it's very visually stylized. It seems to fit with a run of horror movies in the last 5 or 8 years that really hit that 80s throwback note, where you see a lot of bright neon colors and that kind of synthesizer music. There is a lot of purple in this movie. I kind of enjoy that as a feast for the eyes, but the horror subject matter involves this element coming down and combining different creatures into each other. It reminds me a lot of the movie Annihilation with Natalie Portman, and some people have actually cited this movie as an outright inspiration for that movie. Now, the reason that it ranks above typical horror movies and gets onto the fucked up rating system is because of the creative visual effects they use in creating these hybridized monsters. It eventually starts affecting the family, and you see some really disturbing images of how different people and creatures get molded into these monstrosities using visual effects. There's no real CGI here. The next Nick Cage vehicle is the movie Mandy. Now, this one sees Nick Cage going full psycho. In fact, there's a pretty famous image now of him screaming with his face entirely covered in blood, just going full Nick Cage, and it's amazing. This movie is highly visually stylized, which is one of the reasons why I gave it a pass for being as slow and art house as it is in the beginning. If you're not a fan of art house movies, you might not like this. It feels like you're watching a 70s psychedelic trip. It gets really, really heavy on the color palettes, but it does some really creative stuff with the cinematography that I appreciate. I recommend going into this movie expecting to kill a couple of hours. Go in kind of a thoughtful, contemplative mood. Let the pacing and the atmosphere and the visuals of the movie kind of take you in. The horror element really hits home in the last part of the movie, and that's where you see Nick Cage just absolutely slaughtering this group of bikers, and it is a feast for the eyes. Buckets of blood, over-the-top horror. It makes good creative use of the physical violence, which I always find interesting, and I can appreciate the artistic nature of it. It's not going to be for everybody, but I do recommend you check it out. That's why Mandy clocks in at a solid 2 Fs. The next movie up at 2 Fs is The Void. I really enjoyed this movie. Just like the previous 2, it kind of fit that 70s, 80s throwback with the color palette, with the synthesized music. It really plays into the nostalgia of that era of horror movies. The whole theme revolves around the presence of this cult in this town. You get some vibes that very much feel like Hellraiser or like fourth season of Stranger Things. Again, the visual effects are what gives this 2 Fs. They have some creature effects that are absolutely fantastic. It doesn't really rely on jump scares. It relies on the creativity of the visual effects and the disturbing creatures that they put together to just put a really bad taste in your mouth. It does a really good job with that aspect of horror, and I really enjoyed it. There's definitely going to be some scenes that have you just white knuckling it. If you appreciate really overdone real creature effects, then you'll really like this movie. Okay, now we're getting into the spicy sauce. We're getting to 3 Fs. So this is where we're gonna see some especially disturbing subject matter and some real over-the-top displays of violence, of blood and guts. The first one, clocking in at 3 Fs, has blood and guts in spades, and that is Peter Jackson's Dead Alive. This is a movie that completely went under my radar. It's a cult hit. I was amazed that I hadn't heard of it or watched it before this year. If you've ever enjoyed a horror movie because it was so ridiculous and over the top that you laughed the whole time, that's what this movie is. It is definitely gross. It is definitely disturbing, but it is also absolutely hilarious. It's just so much. The visual effects are over the top. They don't necessarily look real. In fact, I don't even think they really try to look real. This is 1980s, just latex and fake blood and relying on textures and things popping and liquids going everywhere to really gross you out. The whole movie involves some cursed rat from some remote part of the world that was taken into a zoo and bites somebody, causing this outbreak to spread where everybody starts to turn not even into zombies, but into these like grotesque, overdeveloped creatures. And it's just so disgusting. The last part of the movie involves an exhausting amount of violence. It is just beat after beat after beat of just really creative, over-the-top displays of zombie killing. It was one of the most enjoyable movie watching experiences I think I've ever gone through. My wife thought there was something wrong with me because I couldn't stop grinning. I couldn't stop laughing. If you like The Evil Dead, if you liked any of Sam Raimi's horror movies, it's like that, just turned up to 11. It is so crazy and over the top. It's not so much that any one part of it is disturbing, but it's just the amount of creativity that went into the creature effects. This is a movie that is going to stay with you. The next movie up clocks in at 3 Fs, but this is for slightly darker reasons. Speak No Evil is about a family with a small child who meets another family with their small child who's a mute, and they end up becoming fast friends and actually vacationing with them. Now, the family that they meet, they're a little bit different, but they're charming, so they get pulled in very quickly. Now, the first probably 3/4 of the movie, not scary, not horrific, but definitely suspenseful, mainly because of how this host family pushes against normal social cues. They do a lot of really cringy things where they're obviously trying to push the boundaries, obviously trying to see what they can get away with. And then when they push too hard, their hands go up and they say, hey, what's the problem? We're all friends here. Like, imagine that you're staying with a family that invited you over and they had the idea to take you out to a very nice expensive dinner, and then at the very end they conned you into paying for it. And then there's more aggressive things like reprimanding the other couple's child. So this host family really pushes back against social norms, and it's extremely uncomfortable for that reason. Now, the 3 Fs don't come from just poor social etiquette. The 3 Fs come from the third act of the movie where the mystery is solved. You figure out what the deal with this host family is. Of course, nothing is what it seems, and it ends on such a dark, bleak note. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth. I wouldn't say anything about the movie is specifically scary. The subject matter is very, very depressing, very, very dark, and it's all about 10 or 15 minutes of movie at the end that really puts the cherry on top. I did enjoy this movie because it's a genuine mystery. You spend the whole time trying to figure out what the deal with this couple is. And then by the time you get to the end, there is a very big reveal, a very big payoff that made the whole thing kind of worth it. The only spoiler I'm going to give is that this movie leaves a very bad taste in your mouth. It definitely earns its 3 Fs. Now, the last 3 F movie is similar in pacing in that it starts with a mystery and you spend a lot of time turning around the events in your mind, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to get to the bottom of it. There's just enough suspense and intrigue to keep you along, but it really is the third act that has all of the really horrific elements baked into it, and that's Goodnight Mommy. Now, I watched the original Austrian version. I didn't watch the remake. The originals, especially when they're foreign movies, tend to be much better. And this is a movie that had a very artfully done plot. There's a very big twist at the end. And the violence that takes place at the end is extremely hard to watch. The subject matter relating to the relationship of the mother and her kids is also very disturbing. And it just leaves you with a general sense of, this is fucked up. The whole premise of the movie is these twin boys have their mother come home from plastic surgery. Her face is bandaged up and she seems to be acting differently. She seems to be lashing out more. And the kids are trying to figure out what's going on, and they become convinced, and you don't know whether they're right or wrong, they become convinced that that's not their mom. The way the third act plays out, it's just so aggressive and it slaps you upside the head, but it stays with you. It was very enjoyable if you have a stomach for displays of horror that are a bit hard to watch. Okay, now we're climbing up the charts. We're getting into dangerous territory here. This is where I have to start giving disclaimers. This is where I have to start giving trigger warnings. We're getting into 4F territory. First, 4F. This movie, me and my wife sat through, and we just had our jaws hanging open the entire time. I can't even describe like the level of depravity in this movie. It is, I think, structurally a very good, well done movie. It's interesting, it's artful, but not over the top weirdo art house. It just hit so many different nerves. It was so different and unique as a movie that I hated it, but I enjoyed it, and it stayed with me, and that's why it made this list, and that's Eyes of My Mother. This movie is filmed in black and white, which I'm almost grateful for because I think it took some of the edge off, and it's about a young girl who witnesses her mother brutalized by a serial killer. This little girl then grows up with just her father, who's emotionally detached from the trauma that they went through, and, shocking twist, they actually have the serial killer, instead of killing him, they have him chained up in the barn, where the little girl takes care of him as some type of chained pet. It is extremely disturbing, extremely dysfunctional. The girl grows up into a woman who may not be explicitly evil, but is certainly off, certainly traumatized by the events she witnessed. It routinely calls back to the girl's relationship with her mother as a child, when her mom taught her a procedure. She was a medical professional in the country that they emigrated from, where they would take the eyes from the farm animals. And that's a theme that goes out through the movie. There's some hard to watch displays of violence, start to finish. It really is the subject matter, more so than the explicit displays of violence, that are so fundamentally disturbing. And I can't really tell you what they are without giving away the plot. If you're looking for something that is artfully done, has good cinematography, is different and unique, but also will keep you thinking about it for the next couple of days, like that piece of popcorn that gets stuck right in the back of your molars, this is a movie worth checking out. It's not specifically scary, but it is extremely disturbing, very hard to watch. The next 4F movie is a Korean movie. I've become a big fan of foreign cinema, especially in this genre, because they are hitting creative notes that nobody in Hollywood does. Hollywood is creatively bankrupt. Meanwhile, these other cultures are starting to have their storytelling renaissance. They're starting to participate more in the world economy of movies and storytelling, and it's absolutely fantastic. For as campy and as corny as I thought it was, I absolutely loved Squid Game. It was super stimulating and suspenseful and interesting, and it was just new. It was just refreshing to see something new. And you definitely see the beats of these foreign films, because you can tell where a lot of these cultures are influenced by Western movies, Western pop culture, but they definitely have their own flavor that they leave on it. Often have elements that are reminiscent of what you find in their comics. Certain bits of drama or horror or action that are way over the top that you wouldn't traditionally find in these genres. I Saw the Devil is about a police detective whose wife is brutally murdered by a serial killer. And not only does he catch the killer, but he decides to torment the killer, not by torturing him, but by maiming him, releasing him, and tracking him again and again. There's some over-the-top elements, like the serial killer has his network of serial killer friends, and they each have their own like over-the-top defining fetishes, like you might have in a rogues gallery of supervillains. But the suspense, the violence, the subject matter, just the gut-wrenching theme of the movie stays with you. It was hugely enjoyable. I'm actually ranking this 4Fs, not because it's really any more effed up than any of the other movies that we've covered so far, but the fact that it was so artfully done, it is so different. The subject matter is absolutely bleak. There are just some gut-wrenching scenes in the movies, and there is a lot of creative displays of violence. But the plot of this movie is so unique. It's so creative. It's so unlike anything you've ever seen in any horror or suspense movie, certainly unlike any slasher movie you've seen. This is just one of the most satisfying movies I've seen in this genre. Now the top two we're getting into, these are 5F movies. These are spicy tamales. These are the ones you have to come in hazmat gear to protect you from the acidic nature of what you're about to experience. The first one is Martyrs. Now, just like Goodnight Mommy, I watched the original French version. I did not watch the remake that they did. Again, the originals, especially if they're foreign movies, they just tend to be so much better, so much darker. They don't pull any punches. Now, the first half of the movie it's pretty slow. There's a bit of a mystery. You're trying to figure out what the backstory is of these two girls. You have a young girl who you piece together was held captive and tortured when she was very young. Now as an adult, she seems to be chasing the perpetrators, seeking to enact some sort of violence. The first part of the movie, you know that this movie is on another level because of what she does to this family she stumbles upon. The next, I would say, third of the movie is a bit slower. The plot doesn't really develop. You're left with this mystery hanging in the air. You're not sure if she's crazy. Did she imagine it? What's going on? Then the third act, the plot twist hits. The pacing of the movie is very different. It's very unique because the twist seems to come out of left field. It's interesting. It's stimulating, but it doesn't quite have that classical mystery feel where it's something that should be solvable. But I have to give them bonus points for creativity. Now, the part of the movie that is really hard to watch is the few final scenes. The level of body horror that goes on is just so absolutely next level. The plot is extremely creative. I would actually say the twist at the end does serve as a pretty big payoff. It's something you did not see coming, you didn't expect, and it has a very interesting open ending. I usually hate open endings, but the more I thought about this one, the more I thought it was artfully done. Full warning, 5F, it's gonna leave a bad taste in your mouth, but in this case, I'm gonna say that the juice is worth the squeeze. Now we're finishing up the last one on this list, 5F. I should call this 5F plus just because of the rate at which you get assaulted. Your eyes are just hit beat after beat after beat. When you're done, you feel like you ran a marathon. I sat with my wife in this movie on opening night, our jaws just hanging open. There were times where I just had to look at her like, what the fuck did I just watch? Terrifier 2. Now, I really enjoyed Terrifier 1, and I can sell them as a combo because they have the same elements. If you're a fan of one, you're probably going to be a fan of the other. The whole movie revolves around Art the Clown, psychopathic serial killer, certainly a creepy costume design. With at this stage in the development of horror as an industry, that's really hard to do, make clowns somehow scarier because it's such an overdone trope. But Art the Clown, really well done visually, really well done by the actor that plays him. And he's just a psychopathic clown. And you don't really know, is this some supernatural element? Is this just somebody escaped from a mental asylum who's just completely unhinged? Terrifier 2 answers that a little bit more conclusively. But the whole movie, the hallmark of the movie is just horrible, over-the-top violence that does not pull any punches. Every other horror movie you've ever seen, it's just a knife going in, it's a lot of blood, it's people screaming, and if something beyond that happens, if a limb gets chopped off, if somebody gets dismembered, it happens off screen. This is utilizing the most cutting-edge visual effects. The camera never pulls away, and some of these scenes go on for several minutes. It very much is body horror, torture porn, but it feels the most Halloween of any movie on this list because it is a psycho clown going around killing people. It cuts to the core of everything you're going to see when you go to an amusement park or a haunted house. You definitely have to be a fan of horror. You definitely have to be a fan of over-the-top violence and just really disturbing imagery to get anything out of this movie. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it had an interesting plot. It was unpredictable. I didn't know what was going to happen at the end. But like I said in the beginning, if I can't get a solid script or good acting, at the very least, I can get just buckets of blood. Terrifier 2 has that in spades in a way that I can't even explain to you. It's about as over the top as Dead Alive, but much, much more serious, much more disturbing, much more grim. I definitely wasn't laughing at any point during Terrifier 2. So that's my Meathead movie review. That's my list of Bromley approved fucked up horror movies. If you want to send off the Halloween season in style, do it with everybody's least favorite candy, a bucket of candy corn, get your favorite cocktail, and sit down and let your eyes just absorb this absolute insanity. If you've seen these movies, let me know what you think. If you haven't, go ahead and watch some of them. Tell us what your experience is. Come back to the comments, leave it here. And let me know if you guys like this. I've seen a shit ton of movies. I like reviewing stuff like that. I actually had dedicated another channel to that. So if you guys like the movie reviews, let me know. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.